All right, as promised, we could not have today's show without talking about tariffs. And so I've got your regular host, Shaun Haney, and Kelvin Heppner, both of Real Agriculture, joining me here. Welcome, gents. How are you now?
Oh,
Doing
fabulous.
well.
Fabulous. Shaun's a liar, is what he is. Okay, no, just kidding. Shaun loves this stuff. So does Kelvin Heppner. So here we are. We're recording Monday, Monday morning, I want to say, because of course, who knows what will transpire today, but we'll catch you up to now. Kelvin, catch us up on what happened over the weekend.
First of all, I'd say I love following news. I'm not sure that this news story is one that I can just personally. It is not has not been a joy to cover this one, certainly. But yeah, a lot happened over the weekend. We could talk about this for a long time. But in brief, President Trump on Saturday afternoon signed 3 executive orders applying tariffs as of tomorrow, February 4th, to Canada. 25% across the board, except for energy products, get a carve out at 10%. Mexico gets a 25% tariff, and China gets a 10% tariff. And so now we've seen all kinds of reaction and discussion about what that means. In the meantime, late Saturday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canada will be retaliating with tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. imports, with the first $30 billion tranche affected as of February 4th as well. The 125, the bigger round, is expected to be announced here in the coming days, with that taking effect in about 3 weeks' time. They are looking to give Canadian businesses some time to find different suppliers and that kind of thing. There will be some consultations on what's on that list as well. So the immediate response from Canada is this $30 billion tariffs on $30 billion worth of imports. That list came out yesterday as well. So we have a story on Real Ag breaking down some of what's on that list. But and we know that the President and Prime Minister spoke this morning, and that they are speaking again sometime this afternoon. And so there is still some hope out there that this all gets canceled or at least delayed, that there's an off-ramp, but it's not clear what that is at this point.
So, Shaun, ever the optimist, do you think the Trudeau-Trump discussion today will mean that your soothsaying last week of this doesn't actually get implemented actually happens?
Well, at this point, I don't think any of us know. My reaction to them talking this morning, as was promised, and them talking again today at 3 p.m. Eastern, I view that as a positive. I think one of the things that's been lacking clarity here is what's the actual ask. We know this is, fentanyl's a concern. It's a concern for Canada. It's a concern for the United States. The numbers speak to the fact that it's not to the level of concern from Canada's perspective with the U.S. that it is with the U.S. and Mexico from an illegal crossing standpoint on migrants or on fentanyl. So that's not really the ask. So it gets some attention, but what do you really want? I would hope that's what was discussed this morning. Clear, here's what I need. Here's what I want. Canada now has till 3 p.m. probably to answer the ultimatum that has been presented. We're getting a little bit closer to talking turkey, I would guess. I view it as a positive. Now, there's a bunch of things that can happen here. We could see President Trump say, hey, you retaliated. I told you not to. I'm going to increase the tariff. That's a possibility.
There is that clause in the executive order.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a possibility. So, and I agree with Canada calling the bluff, by the way. I think you got to press your chips in here in very short order. Another scenario is Canada and Mexico agree to renegotiate the USMCA earlier than was originally agreed to. That could back off the tariffs from being implemented, or maybe a reduced tariff. And there's probably those are kind of the two main ones. There's probably 3, 4, and 5 of other ones, but
Yeah.
I think we're up to like 10 different things that different U.S. Trump administration officials have said that they want from Canada. And that's why this is impossible to negotiate right now. How does Canada reach a conclusion or provide a solution to President Trump, give him a win without having something clearly defined as the ask, which, like you said, Shaun, it would be really nice if from Canada's perspective, if there was something clear put on the table this morning.
I thought it was interesting. The U.S. Dairy Export Council sent out a release yesterday, and I thought it was interesting that, dairy, one of the big things that Canada and the U.S. have traditionally fought about, there was showing concern and support for needing to control illegal migration and fentanyl. But there wasn't a lot of talk about how we need to pin this to the Canadians and get more dairy access. There was more of a like, let's hope cooler heads can prevail and this can be worked out. I thought that was an interesting kind of tell here a little bit from the U.S. dairy industry.
Kelvin, we've also heard, I was going to say we've also heard from the canola industry, but we're hearing a lot from the fertilizer industry as well. I'm not sure if that's where you were going with this, but there's some significant concerns.
Yeah. Canadian farm groups have almost all of them have come out with news releases or statements here in the last 2 days condemning these tariffs and highlighting the devastation that they could cause. But on the American side of the border, Shaun mentioned the U.S. Dairy Export Federation. We also saw American Farm Bureau, Zippy Duval, raise alarm about the impact of these tariffs. And the Fertilizer Institute, which represents the U.S. fertilizer industry stakeholders supply chain, is also calling for an exemption for potash and nitrogen fertilizer products from Canada. Of course, potash, what is it, Shaun? 88% of the potash?
86, yeah.
Or 87?
Yeah, whatever.
I think the U.S. imports 95%.
Yeah.
95% of potash used in the U.S. annually is imported, and over 90% of that comes from Canada. And so that's something where they're calling, fertilizer industry certainly is calling on the Trump administration to exempt that. And I think from Canada's perspective, that's potentially a leverage point where there could be restrictions or an export tax applied if there's an exemption there where that it certainly wouldn't make stakeholders in Saskatchewan where that potash is mined happy and the companies that own those mines happy. But if there's maybe some compensation put on the table, that might alleviate some of those concerns. And I think that restricting potash exports to the U.S. would have less domestic backlash here in Canada than restricting oil or energy exports. And at the same time, it would inflict more pain on influential customers, let's face it, in the U.S. Midwest as with spring around the corner.
We've also got definitely concern on the livestock side. Hogs going down to the States. So weanlings heading down to the States is a huge part of the hog sector. Cattle as well. I'm headed to CattleCon. As I said, Shaun's jealous. I'm not sure that if we could switch, I think we would. Shaun, what are you hearing? Like, how do we navigate this on the cattle side?
Well, I
think the threat of this.
Yeah, I was posting on X on the weekend about this. I think if you're in a procurement department in the U.S., whether you're a farm or you're a large corporation, a processor or a packer, there's so much political risk here because if there's a narrative, and I think it's a believable one that, read Art of the Deal. This is asking for everything, including, Canada becoming the 51st state and get what you actually want as the ask is pulled back through the negotiation. If that's the case, and all of a sudden, President Trump changes his mind, hey, there's no tariffs this week. How are you going to feel if you had transacted on Tuesday when the tariffs are removed on a Thursday? You just increased your cost of goods on that inventory by 25%. And so this is the challenge that a lot of people are going through here, where I think, even if there is somewhat of a delay this week, I'm not sure how much business actually gets done. I'm being very patient because I am concerned because of the height of the political risk here that things are going to be flipped. Now, having said that, there is a lot of discussion happening, especially in the livestock sector, about who actually owes the tariff, who is going to pay it. And that's going to be I've talked to several people in the feed yard industry. We're having discussions with U.S. packers about that. Is it on the responsibility of the producer? Is it the packer that needs to pay it? And probably depending on how important of a customer you are, that's going to sort of derive some of that. So, I'm sure the same thing's happening on the hog side.
Well, and that's just it, is that leverage comes into play here. Because obviously, in the truest form, it should be the person bringing something into the U.S. Sure, but that's not reality. So, Kelvin, this brings to me, and one of the reasons that tariffs are just so disruptive to any sort of economic discussion is things like this. Like this, to me, the uncertainty and the volatility of them being on, off, etc., that in and of itself will have an incredibly negative impact and already is.
Yeah, exactly. And like Sean alluded to, in some of these cases right now, buyers are just saying, no, we're not buying anything right now. We got to wait for the dust to settle here. And as the longer this uncertainty drags out and the longer the chaos reigns, the more that those relationships and transactions get severed, the more the supply chain backs up, and you end up with weanlings in hog barns here in Manitoba that don't have anywhere to go. That type of scenario is certainly on the
Yeah.
table here this week as we speak. Companies are making plans if that scenario unfolds.
There's also certainly we have heard on, exactly that, Sean. Who pays the tariff? When does it get paid? Who adjusts their prices? There's a lot of negotiating going around in these individual, actual agreements. What sort of impact could that have on things like a cattle industry that needs to be processing cattle every week?
Yeah, you can only back off feed for
Mhm.
so long, and if you haven't been paying attention, these animals are worth a lot of money.
Yep.
If let's just say, for example, an Alberta cattle feeder was responsible to pay 100% of the tariff, we're talking about $1,000 an animal, people.
Mhm.
Like we are not talking about
Hundred
short,
bucks or
small
whatever.
change here.
Yeah.
When we think about integrated supply chains, and you're going to hear a lot about this week at CattleCon, Lyndsey. The cattle industry is a great example. It's similar to kind of the auto industry, where inventory is moving back and forth in a very efficient manner to try to deliver to the consumer and feed that demand that is out there, whether it's domestically in Canada, the U.S., or that is internationally. Those supply chains are set up for a reason, the way that they are, especially post 1990 and the early 90s and NAFTA. So, this kind of 25% tariff to this level is significant, whether that's corn coming into Canada, that is feeder cattle coming into Canada, that is fat cattle leaving, backgrounders leaving, box beef leaving. And that's the other thing we're not following here. What happens to box beef trade?
Yeah.
If I'm a packer sitting in Canada, I am not just going to willy-nilly be trying to move product to the U.S. It's going to have an impact relatively soon on what beef prices are at the grocery store level in the U.S. And what we saw last week about the talk about all the egg prices going up to the significance that they have, just imagine how people are going to be outraged about beef.
Kelvin,
And that's
and yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just jump in? That
Yeah.
brings up Canada's retaliatory list, and what's on that initial list that was announced yesterday. Live cattle is not on there. Beef is not on there. Pork is not on there. But Finance Canada has said that beef and pork products will be on the 3 weeks from now kind of list, the $125 billion list. So we can expect retaliatory tariffs on American beef and pork products coming this way if things don't if we don't reach a solution before that. Should also note that corn you mentioned coming into Canada from the U.S. not on the list either, but canola is, and that is an issue for a crush plant. For example, Bunge has a crush plant just near where I live here in southern Manitoba that gets a large portion of its incoming canola seed from North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota farmers. That canola seed is going to potentially will face a tariff starting tomorrow coming into Canada, and so there you have American farmers being affected by that. At the same time, Bunge and other canola crushers across Canada are going to have to deal with a tariff on oil and meal going into the U.S., and so that's where things could quickly come to a head here in the processing value add sector of agriculture in the coming days, unless again we see some sort of resolution.
Yeah, and if you believe that somebody like Senator Grassley has influence, who this morning was posting on X about needing exemptions on fertilizer for American farmers, where I would be going if I'm the Canadian government, I'm going to ethanol. If you look at U.S. ethanol exports that are very important to the U.S. farmer, 30% of those exports go to Canada. It's over $1 billion a year. 60% of our ethanol imports are coming from the U.S. This is big business, and we don't think of it as an ag commodity. It is an ag commodity in the Corn Belt. So I would be trying to tap into that in 21 days, that $122 billion additional list. If I'm the Canadian government, I'm putting ethanol on that list.
All right, let's leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you both. Everyone, head on over to realagriculture.com. We've got tons of coverage there, and we'll continue to over the course of this week as this all plays out. And come on back to the Friday Issues panel. We'll be, I don't know, it seems a very long way away and also not. So we'll see.
I don't know where we're going to be on Friday.
I have no idea. Okay, Kelvin, Shaun, thank you so much.